The clinic smelled of antiseptic and lies. Outside, the rain fell like judgment, but inside that small examination room, silence became a weapon. She thought the walls would protect her secret. She thought distance meant safety. But some truths burn too bright to hide, and some beings hear not just words, but the rhythm of guilt in a heartbeat. That night, behind a door she believed was closed, something ancient stirred, and it was listening. The fluorescent lights hummed above her head like a swarm of dying insects, casting everything in that cold, clinical white that made her skin look ghostly. Elena Moreau sat on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her with every shallow breath she took. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles bone white, nails digging crescents into her palms. Outside, London drowned in October rain. The kind of rain that didn't just fall. It attacked, relentless and accusatory, battering the windows of the Harley Street Clinic, as if trying to wash away sins that clung too deep to be cleansed. Elena watched the water stream down the glass, distorting the streetlights beyond into abstract smears of gold and shadow. She wished she could disappear into that blur, become nothing, become invisible. Ms. Moreau, Dr. Ashworth's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. She was a woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that had witnessed too many secrets to be shocked by anything anymore. Her white coat was pristine, her movements efficient. She glanced at the file in her hands, then back at Elena with professional concern that almost felt genuine. I need to ask you a few questions before we proceed with the ultrasound. Elena nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Her heart hammered against her ribs like something trapped and desperate. Breathe, she told herself. Just breathe. It's just a routine appointment. Nothing more. But nothing about her life had been routine for the past 3 months. Dr. Ashworth settled onto her stool, rolling closer with a clipboard balanced on her knee. You're approximately 12 weeks along, according to your last menstrual period. Is that correct? Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. Any complications so far? Bleeding, severe cramping, unusual symptoms? Elena shook her head. The truth was, she felt nothing physical. No morning sickness, no fatigue, nothing that every pregnancy book said she should be experiencing. It was as if her body had become a vessel for something that didn't follow natural laws, something that wasn't entirely human. She swallowed hard, pushing that thought down into the dark place where she kept all the truths she couldn't afford to acknowledge. Dr. Ashworth made a note, then looked up with the kind of expression that preceded difficult questions. Elena, I need to know, is there any history we should be aware of? Genetic conditions, blood disorders, complications in your family? No, nothing. And the father? Dr. Ashworth paused, her pen hovering over the paper. Her eyes held something between medical necessity and gentle curiosity. Will he be involved in the prenatal care? We typically recommend that both parents attend these appointments when possible. The question hung in the air like a blade. Elena's breath caught. Her vision tunneled. The room suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in, the hum of the lights growing louder until it was nearly unbearable. Her pulse roared in her ears, a deafening rush that drowned out everything else. Who is the father? 3 words. Simple, clinical, devastating. Elena opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. How could she possibly answer? How could she explain that the father wasn't supposed to exist in daylight conversations, in medical files, in any world where normalcy still held meaning? How could she tell this competent, rational woman that she had spent one night, one impossible, transcendent night, in the arms of something that walked in darkness and drank life itself? The silence stretched too long. Dr. Ashworth's expression softened with what might have been pity. Elena, if this is a difficult situation, if there's any question of consent or safety, there are resources I can connect you with. You're not alone in this. But I am alone, Elena thought desperately. More alone than you could possibly understand. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that beyond the examination room door, in the shadowed corridor where the lights flickered intermittently, something stood motionless, not breathing, not moving, just listening. Lucian Thorne had perfected the art of stillness over 7 centuries. As the vampire king of the European territories, he had learned that true power wasn't in dramatic displays or supernatural speed. It was in patience, in watching, in knowing exactly when to strike and when to wait. He leaned against the wall, his tall frame draped in a black coat that seemed to absorb what little light existed in that hallway. His features were sharp and aristocratic, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes the color of smoke that could shift to burning amber in a moment of hunger or rage. Right now, they were fixed on the door with an intensity that would have terrified anyone who noticed. But no one noticed. The nurses walked past without seeing him. The receptionist at the desk down the hall never glanced his way. He existed in the blind spots of human perception, a shadow among shadows. He had followed Elena here, just as he had followed her for the past week. Ever since he had felt it, that strange, impossible pull that had led him to her apartment building, to her morning walks, to this clinic. At first, he had told himself it was merely curiosity. She had vanished from his estate 3 months ago, disappearing in the night without explanation, without farewell. It had been inconvenient, annoying even. He didn't chase the humans he entertained. He didn't need to. But Elena had been different from the start. He remembered that night with perfect clarity. She had been a guest at one of Marcus Ashford's tedious charity galas, some fundraiser for preservation of historical estates that the old vampire had insisted on hosting. Lucian had attended out of political obligation, bored within minutes by the pageantry and pretense. And then he had seen her. She stood alone on the terrace, away from the crowd, staring up at the stars with an expression of such profound loneliness that it had stopped him mid-step. She wore a simple black dress, nothing remarkable, but the way the moonlight caught her dark hair, the curve of her neck, the unconscious grace in how she held herself. He had approached. They had talked. About nothing and everything. About the weight of history. The burden of secrets. The strange mathematics of loneliness that never quite added up to connection. She had looked at him without fear, without the usual human nervousness that accompanied his presence. As if she saw him, truly saw him, and wasn't afraid of what she found. One night had become one morning. Passion had become something more dangerous. And then she had fled. Now, standing in the sterile corridor, Lucian listened to her heartbeat through the wall. He could hear its erratic rhythm, the spike of panic when the doctor asked her question. He could smell her fear, sharp and acrid, cutting through the antiseptic. And he could sense something else. Something that made his ancient blood turn cold. Life, new life, pulsing faintly but undeniably in her womb. It shouldn't have been possible. Vampires were dead things, animated by dark magic and blood. They didn't create life. They consumed it. In 700 years, Lucian had never sired a child, had never even heard of such a thing occurring outside of myths and legends that even vampires dismissed as fantasy. Yet here it was, undeniable, impossible, real, inside the examination room. Dr. Ashworth was still waiting for an answer. Elena's silence had stretched past uncomfortable into concerning. The doctor set down her clipboard and leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. Elena, you don't have to tell me if you're not ready. But I need to know if there's anything medically relevant I should be aware of. Any family history from the father's side that might affect. He's not involved. Elena's voice came out stronger than she expected, though it trembled at the edges. He doesn't know, and he won't, ever. It was the first clear answer she had given, and it landed with the weight of finality. Dr. Ashworth nodded slowly, making another note. That's your choice to make. But you should know that as the pregnancy progresses, these questions may come up again. Medical history matters for the baby's health. I understand. Elena forced herself to meet the doctor's eyes. But that doesn't change anything. He can't know. Because if he knew, she thought, he would come for me. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to refuse him again. In the hallway, Lucian's jaw clenched. His fingers curled into fists at his sides, and for a moment, the lights in the entire corridor flickered violently. A nurse paused mid-step, glancing up at the ceiling with confusion before continuing on her way. She was carrying his child, and she had run from him. hidden from him, decided to face this alone rather than what? Trust him? He almost laughed at the absurdity. He was a vampire king, a creature of darkness. He had killed more people than she had years in her life. What exactly did he expect? That she would return to him with joy, with hope, seeking his protection and care? But the fury burning through him wasn't entirely rational. It was possessive, primal. Mine, something in him snarled. Mine. Dr. Ashworth stood and moved the ultrasound machine, her movements brisk and professional once more. Let's take a look at how everything is developing. Lie back for me, please, and lift your shirt just above your waist. Elena complied, her movements mechanical. The paper crinkled. The cold gel hit her skin, making her flinch. She stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them, trying to focus on anything except the screen that was about to reveal the truth she had been avoiding. The doctor moved the wand across her abdomen. The room filled with a strange rhythmic sound, fast and steady, like galloping horses or distant thunder. There's the heartbeat, Dr. Ashworth said, a smile entering her voice. Strong and steady. That's good. Elena's own heart stuttered. She turned her head, unable to resist, and looked at the screen. At first, she couldn't make sense of the abstract shapes in black and white. But then she saw it, a small form, curled and impossibly fragile. Moving, living. Tears burned her eyes. She didn't know what she had expected to feel. Horror, maybe. Regret. But instead, there was something else. Something that felt dangerously close to wonder. Everything looks healthy so far, Dr. Ashworth continued, taking measurements and making notes. Development is right on track for 12 weeks. We'll do some blood work today just to check your levels, and I want to see you again in 4 weeks. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Outside, Lucien had heard enough. He pushed away from the wall and walked down the corridor with silent, predatory grace. His mind was already working through possibilities, strategies, consequences. She thought she could hide this from him. She thought she could bear his child alone, raise it in secret, deny him his right to what? Exactly? He wasn't human. He couldn't be a father in any conventional sense. What life could he offer a child? What future? But the fury remained. And beneath it, something else he hadn't felt in centuries, something that might have been fear. When Elena emerged from the examination room 20 minutes later, clutching appointment cards and pamphlets about prenatal vitamins, the corridor was empty. She walked through the clinic in a daze, barely seeing the other patients in the waiting room, barely hearing the receptionist confirm her next appointment. The rain had lessened to a drizzle by the time she stepped outside. Harley Street glistened with reflected light, the evening settling in early as October always demanded. Elena pulled her coat tighter and started walking, her mind spinning. She had done it. She had survived the appointment without breaking, without revealing anything dangerous. The secret was still hers. But as she walked, she felt it again, that sensation she had been experiencing for days now. The feeling of being watched, not by human eyes, but by something else, something patient and predatory and impossibly close. She glanced over her shoulder. The street behind her was empty except for a few pedestrians hurrying home. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Yet the feeling remained. And somewhere in the shadows between the buildings, Lucien Thorne stood watching her walk away. His expression was unreadable, carved from ancient stone and modern rage. He had questions that demanded answers. He had rights that she had denied him. But most of all, he had patience. 7 centuries had taught him many things. One of them was that secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, always came to light. And when they did, there would be a reckoning. Elena reached the underground station and descended into the tunnels, disappearing from sight. Only then did Lucien allow himself to move. He walked in the opposite direction, his coat billowing behind him like wings, his presence causing unconscious parting in the sparse evening crowd. He had much to consider, plans to make, alliances to secure or sever. Because this child, this impossible child, changed everything, every power balance, every carefully maintained treaty. Every assumption about what vampires were and weren't capable of, wars have been fought over less. As night claimed London fully, the vampire king vanished into darkness, carrying with him a secret that would soon shatter centuries of carefully maintained order. And Elena, riding the cramped tube toward her small flat in Camden, placed one hand unconsciously over her stomach and wondered why she suddenly felt like prey being circled by something that had already decided to strike. The hunt had begun. She just didn't know it yet. The Obsidian Hall existed beneath London like a buried crown, ancient, magnificent, and utterly hidden from mortal eyes. Located 60 feet below the foundations of the Tower of London, accessible only through passages that shifted location every lunar cycle, it was where the vampire aristocracy gathered when matters of empire demanded attention. Tonight, the hall blazed with cold light from countless candles arranged in geometric patterns across the floor. Their flames burned blue-white, fed by something other than wax and wick. The vaulted ceiling disappeared into darkness overhead, and the walls were carved from black stone that seemed to absorb sound, making every voice echo with unnatural clarity. Lucian Thorne stood at the center of the chamber, hands clasped behind his back, his expression carefully neutral as the council assembled around him. They materialized from the shadows one by one. 7 ancient vampires who had survived centuries through cunning, cruelty, and an absolute understanding of power's mechanisms. Lady Seraphine arrived first, as she always did. She appeared to be no more than 30, with platinum hair that fell to her waist and eyes like chips of ice. She wore crimson silk that whispered against the stone floor as she moved, and her smile was the kind that preceded assassinations. "Lucian," she purred, settling into her chair with feline grace. "How unexpected. You rarely call sessions yourself anymore. Have you finally grown tired of playing the distant monarch?" "I call sessions when they're warranted," Lucian replied evenly, "as you'll understand shortly." Next came Viktor Konstantinovich, the Russian warlord who had turned during the reign of Ivan the Terrible and had never quite abandoned the brutality of that era. He was massive, broad-shouldered, with a scarred face and hands that could crush stone. He didn't sit, he never did, but stood with arms crossed, watching everything with the patience of a siege engine. "This better be important," he growled in heavily accented English. "I was in the middle of negotiations in Moscow." "It is." The others arrived in quick succession. Empress Mei Ling from the Eastern Territories, beautiful and lethal in equal measure, her movements economical and precise. Father Dominic, the Irish vampire who still wore priest's vestments despite centuries of apostasy, his face gaunt and his eyes burning with zealot's fervor. Lady Ashford, Marcus's wife, elegant and calculating. And finally, Dr. Nathaniel Cross, the youngest of them at only 200 years, a scientist and scholar who approached vampirism as a problem to be understood and optimized. When they were all assembled, the heavy doors sealed themselves with a sound like thunder underground. Wards activated, ensuring that nothing said here would reach beyond these walls. Seraphine leaned forward, her chin resting on her interlaced fingers. "Well, don't keep us in suspense, darling. What crisis has finally dragged you from your solitary brooding?" Lucian met her gaze without flinching. 3 months ago, I encountered a human woman, Elena Moreau. We spent one night together. She fled before dawn, and I let her go. It seemed inconsequential at the time. Victor snorted. "You summoned the council to discuss your romantic disappointments? I've killed for less insulting reasons. I'm not finished." Lucian's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Today, I discovered that she's pregnant. 12 weeks along. The child is mine." Silence crashed over the hall like a physical force. Mei Ling was the first to speak, her voice soft but sharp as silk over steel. "That's impossible. And yet it's true." "You're certain?" Father Dominic's Irish brogue thickened with agitation. "Absolutely certain the child is yours. I can sense it. The connection is undeniable." Lucian's jaw tightened. "I followed her to a medical appointment. Heard her heartbeat. Heard the child's heartbeat. They're linked. And both are linked to me in ways I don't fully understand yet." Dr. Cross stood abruptly, his scholarly demeanor fracturing. "This changes everything. If vampires can reproduce, If we can create life rather than merely perpetuate death, the entire foundation of our understanding is wrong. 7 centuries of research, of assumptions about what we are. It changes more than understanding. Lady Ashford interrupted, her voice cool and measured. It changes politics, power, succession. If the vampire king can produce an heir, every treaty, every territorial agreement, every carefully balanced alliance is suddenly meaningless. Seraphine's eyes had gone cold and calculating. The other territories will see this as a threat, an escalation. Some will want to control the child. Others will want to destroy it before it can become a rallying point for your power. Some in this very room might want that, Victor added bluntly, his gaze sweeping the assembled vampires. A child of Lucian Thorne? That's not just an heir, it's a weapon, a symbol, a threat to anyone who has ever considered challenging you. Which is why I've called you here, Lucian said quietly. This information will spread. Secrets this profound always do. When it does, I need to know where each of you stands. Because make no mistake, this child will be protected. Anyone who threatens it threatens me directly. Father Dominic rose from his chair, his gaunt face twisted with something between awe and horror. You speak of protection, but have you considered what this means theologically? Vampires are cursed creatures. Lucian. Damned. If one of us can create life, what does that say about the nature of our curse? What does it mean for redemption, for damnation, for... I don't care about theology. Lucian cut him off. I care about survival. The child and the mothers. The mother? Seraphine stood, circling Lucian slowly like a shark scenting blood. Tell me, darling, does she know what you are? Lucian hesitated for just a fraction of a second. She knows. And yet she ran from you. She's hiding from you. Clearly, she doesn't want you involved in this miraculous child's life. Seraphine's smile sharpened. How very inconvenient for you. What are you planning? Abduction? Imprisonment? Will you lock her in a tower like some gothic villain? I'm planning to talk to her. Victor barked a laugh. Talk. Right. Because women carrying impossible supernatural children are always reasonable about such things. Mei Ling had been quiet, but now she spoke, her voice cutting to the rising tension. The mother is the key. If she's human and the child is half vampire, the pregnancy itself may kill her. Human bodies aren't designed to sustain supernatural life. The child could drain her, consume her from within. Dr. Cross nodded rapidly. Mei Ling's right. We need to examine her, run tests, understand the biological mechanisms at work. This could be incredibly dangerous for her. No examinations, Lucian said flatly. No tests. Not without her consent. Her consent? Seraphine laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Since when do vampires ask humans for permission? You've grown soft, Lucian. Sentimental. I've grown strategic, he countered. Force her and we create an enemy. An enemy carrying my child, desperate and cornered. That's how tragedies begin. Approach her with respect, with options, and we might actually get cooperation. Lady Ashford studied him with unnerving intensity. You care for her? It wasn't a question. Lucian didn't answer, which was answer enough. Father Dominic sank back into his chair, his fingers forming a steeple as he stared at nothing. A child of darkness and light. Neither fully one nor the other. What prophecies warned of this? What ancient text spoke of hybrid children born from cursed blood? Prophecies, Victor scoffed. You and your superstitions. This is politics, not destiny. Everything is destiny, Father Dominic whispered. Every moment, every choice, every life. This child could be salvation or damnation. We won't know which until it's too late. Mei Ling moved closer to Lucian, her expression thoughtful. The Eastern territories will want to know about this immediately. Empress Keiko will see it as a power shift that requires response. You should prepare for diplomatic overtures or military ones. Let her try, Victor said with brutal simplicity. Any vampire that moves against Lucian's child moves against European unity. They'll find themselves facing more than one king. It was perhaps the closest thing to loyalty Victor had ever expressed. Lucian acknowledged it with a slight nod. Dr. Cross was pacing now, his mind clearly racing. We need to document everything. Every stage of the pregnancy, every development. This could be the most significant event in vampire history since the original curse. If we can understand how this happened, we might be able to replicate it, control it. The child is not a research subject, Lucian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Of course not, Cross backpedaled quickly. I simply mean we should observe, record, preserve the knowledge, for the child's own safety if nothing else. We need to understand what it is, what it can do, what threats it might face. Seraphine had returned to her seat, but her expression remained calculating. And what of the other humans in the mother's life? Her family, friends, colleagues? They'll notice the strangeness eventually. Pregnancies don't stay hidden forever. What happens when questions arise that can't be answered without revealing our existence? I'll handle it. Will you? She tilted her head. Because it seems to me you're about to violate the most sacred rule of our kind. Never expose us to human scrutiny. This child, this impossible hybrid, is exposure incarnate, which is why it needs to be protected. Lady Ashford interjected. Not destroyed, Seraphine, before you suggest it. If this child exists, killing it won't erase the knowledge of what's possible. It will only make martyrs and create enemies. I wasn't suggesting anything, Seraphine replied smoothly, merely observing the complexities. Father Dominic stood again, his movements agitated. There's something else you're not considering. If this child is born, if it survives, what will it be? Human? Vampire? Something entirely new? Will it need blood to survive? Will it age? Die? These aren't academic questions. They're matters of the child's fundamental nature. We'll find out, Lucian said simply. And if the answers horrify you, Mei Ling asked softly, if the child is monstrous, if it threatens everything you built, then I'll deal with that when it happens. But I won't preemptively destroy something because of fear. Victor moved closer, his massive frame casting shadows across the gathered council. You're playing a dangerous game, Thorn. Sentiment is weakness in our world. Always has been. That human woman ran from you for a reason. Maybe she sensed what you really are, what we all are. Predators. Killers. Things that shouldn't create life because we embody death. Maybe, Lucian acknowledged, or maybe she ran because she was terrified and alone and didn't know if she could trust me. Maybe she ran because I gave her every reason to believe I was exactly what you just described, a predator and nothing more. Aren't you? Seraphine's question hung in the air like poison. Lucian met her gaze without flinching. I've been a predator for 700 years. Perhaps it's time to be something else. The council exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between ancient beings who had survived by reading power's subtle shifts. Finally, Lady Ashford spoke, her voice carrying the weight of decision. I'll support you in this, Lucian. But carefully. This child must be kept secret as long as possible. The moment word spreads beyond this chamber, forces will move that none of U.S. can control. Agreed, Mei Ling added. But you'll need resources. Protection for the mother. Safe locations. Medical expertise that can be trusted. Dr. Cross nodded eagerly. I can provide medical support. Discreetly. Father Dominic remained standing, his expression tortured. I'll pray for you all. Because I fear we're about to witness either a miracle or an abomination, and I'm not certain even God knows which. Victor grunted his assent to support, which was as close to an oath as the Russian would ever give. Only Seraphine remained noncommittal, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. I'll reserve judgment. But know this, Lucian. If this child threatens the stability we spent centuries building, I won't hesitate to act. Sentiment or no sentiment. I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Lucian replied. The session concluded with ritual formality. The wards lifted, the doors unsealed, and the council dispersed into shadow, each returning to their territories and machinations. But the information had been planted, the seeds of alliance and opposition sown. Lucian remained alone in the obsidian hall long after the others departed. He stood in the center of the geometric candle patterns, watching their cold flames flicker and dance. His reflection was nowhere to be seen in the black stone walls. Vampires cast no reflections, but he could feel the weight of 7 centuries pressing down on him. A child, his child. It defied everything he understood about himself, about what he was. Vampires were sterile by nature, their bodies locked in an eternal moment of death animated by stolen blood and dark magic. They didn't grow, didn't change, didn't create. They only consumed. Yet Elena carried life within her. Life that was somehow his. He thought of that night 3 months ago. The charity gala at Marcus's estate. The tedious small talk, the performative charity. And then Elena, standing alone on the terrace, looking at the stars with such profound loneliness that it had resonated with something he thought had died centuries ago. They had talked for hours, not about superficial things, but about real things, about the weight of existence, the burden of witnessing time pass while remaining unchanged, the peculiar isolation of being surrounded by people but truly known by none of them. She had understood in ways that surprised him. Her loneliness had matched his own, and when he had invited her to leave with him, she had said yes without hesitation, as if she had been waiting for someone to ask, as if she had been lost and he represented some kind of map. One night had become one perfect, impossible night. Passion and connection, vulnerability and strength. He had told her things he had never told anyone, about the curse of immortality, about the weight of endless years, about the price of power. And she had listened without judgment, without fear, or so he had thought, because when dawn approached, she had fled, left his estate while he slept the death sleep that claimed all vampires during daylight hours. By the time he woke at sunset, she was gone. No note, no explanation, no trace. He had told himself it didn't matter. Humans came and went. Attachments were weakness. He had 7 centuries of experience teaching him that lesson. But he had been wrong. Because she hadn't just left. She had taken a piece of him with her. A piece that was now growing, developing, becoming something entirely new. Lucian extinguished the candles with a gesture, plunging the obsidian hall into absolute darkness. In that darkness, he allowed himself to feel what he had been suppressing since standing outside that clinic. Fear, not for himself. He had long ago accepted that he was damned, cursed, beyond redemption. But for Elena, for the child, for the impossibility of protecting something so fragile in a world as brutal as the one he inhabited. The vampire territories were powder kegs of ambition and ancient grudges, treaties held together through mutual fear, not trust. If word spread about a hybrid child, the first of its kind, every power-hungry vampire across Europe would see opportunity. Some would want to control it, to study it, to use it as leverage against him. Others would want it destroyed before it could upset the delicate balance of power. And Elena, carrying this miraculous burden, was utterly vulnerable. Human, mortal, breakable. He had to reach her before anyone else did. Had to make her understand that hiding was impossible now, that the only path forward was together, protected by his power and resources. But how did he approach her without confirming every fear that had made her run? How did he prove he could be trusted when his very nature was predatory? The darkness offered no answers. Lucian left the obsidian hall through passages that shifted and reformed behind him, emerging into London's night. The city sprawled before him, millions of human lives pulsing with warmth and mortality. Somewhere in that vast urban maze, Elena was trying to sleep, trying to convince herself that she could face this alone. She couldn't. Whether she knew it yet or not, her life had already changed irrevocably the moment she had conceived his child. She had stepped into a world of shadows and ancient power, of supernatural politics and deadly consequences. He would find her tomorrow, talk to her, make her understand, and if she refused, Lucian's expression hardened as he dissolved into shadow, moving through London's darkness with inhuman speed. If she refused, he would protect her anyway, from a distance if necessary, because the child she carried was his responsibility, his miracle, his impossible hope that perhaps redemption wasn't entirely beyond reach, even for monsters, even for kings. Elena's flat in Camden was small, a studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian building that smelled perpetually of curry from the Indian restaurant below. The single window faced a narrow street where buses rumbled past at all hours, and the walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television through the plaster. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Anonymous. Safe. Or it had been, until tonight. Elena stood in her tiny kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea she had no intention of drinking, staring at the door as if she could will it to become an impenetrable barrier through sheer force of belief. The chain lock was engaged. The deadbolt turned. Not that it would matter if he decided to come for her. She had felt his presence all evening. That familiar pressure against her awareness, like static electricity before a storm. He was out there somewhere, circling, waiting, and she knew, with the kind of certainty that bypassed logic and reason, that tonight was the night he would stop waiting. The knock, when it came, was soft, almost gentle. 3 precise taps against the door. Elena's heart lurched. The mug trembled in her hands, tea sloshing over the rim and scalding her fingers. She set it down with a clatter, pressing her back against the refrigerator as if she could somehow make herself smaller, more invisible. Elena! His voice came through the door, rich and impossibly familiar. I know you're there. I can hear your heartbeat. Of course he could. Vampire senses. She had forgotten that detail in her panic. Or perhaps her mind had been protecting her from it. Go away, she called back, hating how her voice shook. I don't want to see you. I'm afraid that's not possible. We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about. We have everything to talk about. A pause. Please, Elena, I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to understand. Understand what? Why you ran. Why you're hiding from me. Why you think you have to face this alone. Her breath caught. He knew. Of course he knew. He had probably known from the moment she conceived, with whatever supernatural senses vampires possessed. All her careful planning, her desperate attempts at secrecy, utterly pointless. I'm not letting you in, she said, trying to inject steel into her voice. Then I'll speak through the door. Your neighbors will find it peculiar, but I don't particularly care. Elena closed her eyes. The thought of Mrs. Chun next door overhearing this conversation, of the questions that would follow, the suspicion, no, she couldn't let that happen. This flat was the only stability she had left. With trembling hands, she approached the door. If I let you in, you promise not to. To what? Attack you? Hurt you? There was something that might have been hurt in his voice. Elena! I spent one night with you 3 months ago. One night where you seemed to trust me, where we connected in ways I haven't experienced in centuries. What did I do in those hours to make you believe I'm a monster? You're a vampire, she whispered. I've been a vampire for 700 years. That wasn't news to you then. He was right. She had known what he was. He had told her straight out, expecting her to flee or laugh or dismiss it as some eccentric delusion. Instead, she had looked into his ancient eyes and seen truth, seen loneliness that matched her own, seen a being who had existed for centuries and was still somehow searching for connection. That night, she hadn't been afraid. But that was before she understood the consequences. Elena unlatched the chain lock, turned the deadbolt, opened the door just wide enough to see him. Lucian Thorne stood in her shabby hallway, as if he had been carved from shadow and starlight. He wore dark clothing that probably cost more than her monthly rent, his black coat hanging from his shoulders like wings. His face was exactly as she remembered, sharp, aristocratic, impossibly beautiful in a way that inhuman things often were. But his eyes, those smoke-gray eyes that could burn amber, held something she hadn't expected. Uncertainty. May I come in? He asked formally. The old myths about vampires needing invitations flickered through her mind. Is that real? You need permission to enter? Not exactly. I could force my way in if I chose. But I won't, because I'm asking you to trust me, and trust requires choice. Elena stepped back, opening the door wider. It felt like a surrender. Lucian entered her flat with careful movements, as if afraid of taking up too much space in her small sanctuary. He looked around at the second-hand furniture, the books stacked everywhere, the single window with its view of the narrow street. His expression was unreadable. You left my estate for this, he said quietly. Not a question, an observation. I left your estate because I woke up and realized I'd spent the night with a vampire, Elena replied, closing the door. She didn't lock it. What would be the point? Because everything that seemed beautiful and impossible in darkness looked terrifying in daylight. Because I didn't know what I was doing, or who you really were, or what it meant. And you're pregnant with my child, Lucian continued, turning to face her, which shouldn't be possible, but apparently is. There it was, the truth, spoken aloud in her tiny kitchen. Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. How long have you known? A week. I felt something, a pull, a connection I couldn't explain. I followed it to you. His gaze dropped to where her hand rested. I was outside the clinic today. Heard everything. Shame and fury warred in her chest. You followed me, spied on me. I was trying to understand what I was sensing. I didn't expect, he broke off, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture of frustration that was startlingly human. Elena, do you understand what this means? Vampires don't reproduce. We don't create life. In 700 years, I've never heard of this happening. You're carrying something impossible. I'm carrying a baby, Elena said firmly. My baby, that's all that matters. Our baby, Lucian corrected gently. And it matters a great deal more than you realize. She shook her head, backing away. No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to show up and claim rights to a child you didn't even know existed until a week ago. I can handle this myself. Can you? He moved closer, not threatening, but intent. When the pregnancy develops and the child starts showing supernatural characteristics, will you handle that yourself? When vampire politics catch wind of an impossible hybrid, when ancient beings see your child as a threat or a tool or a curiosity to be dissected, will you handle that yourself? You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to make you understand reality. His voice dropped. The moment I learned about this child, the moment I called a council session to inform the vampire aristocracy, your safety and the child's became precarious. There are beings in my world who will see this as opportunity. Others who will see it as threat. None of them will hesitate to act. Elena felt cold fear trickling down her spine. You told them? You told other vampires about this. I had to. Keeping secrets from the council would have been more dangerous. At least now I know where certain allegiances stand. At least now I can plan protection rather than reacting to ambush. Protection? Elena repeated hollowly. You mean control. I mean survival. Lucian closed the distance between them in 2 steps, his movements too fast to be human. Elena's back at the wall. And suddenly he was there, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the unnatural coldness radiating from him. Listen to me very carefully. I don't want to control you. I don't want to imprison you or manipulate you or turn you into some captive breeder for a supernatural dynasty. What I want... He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. What I want, he continued more quietly, is for you and the child to be safe. I want to understand what's happening and how to protect you both. I want to be part of this, if you allow it, not because I'm claiming ownership, but because that night 3 months ago actually meant something to me. You meant something to me. Elena stared at him, searching his face for deception, but all she saw was intensity, and beneath it, something that looked disturbingly like fear. You're immortal, she whispered. What could I possibly mean to you? I'll be dead in 60 years if I'm lucky, less than a blink, to someone who's lived 7 centuries. Do you know what 7 centuries teaches you? Lucian asked, his voice rough. It teaches you that time is meaningless without connection, that immortality is just prolonged isolation unless you find moments worth remembering. That night with you, talking until dawn, sharing truths I haven't spoken in decades, that was worth remembering. You made me feel something other than the weight of endless years. And now I'm convenient, Elena said bitterly, carrying your impossible child. You were never convenient. Convenient would have been forgetting you existed. Convenient would have been letting you hide and face this alone. Instead, I'm here, asking you to trust me when you have every reason not to. Tears burned Elena's eyes. She was so tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of hiding. tired of pretending she could handle a supernatural pregnancy by herself while working full-time as a librarian and trying to appear normal to everyone who knew her. "I don't know how to trust you," she admitted. "I don't know how to trust anyone with this." Lucian stepped back, giving her space. "Then let me earn it. Let me prove that I'm not the monster you're imagining. Let me help you through this pregnancy and protect you from the dangers you don't even know exist yet. And what do you want in return?" Elena asked, wiping her eyes. "What's the price?" "To know my child, to be part of its life if you'll allow it, to ensure that both of you survive what's coming." "What is coming?" Lucian's expression darkened. "War, potentially. The vampire territories exist in careful balance. News of a hybrid child, proof that vampires can reproduce, will shatter centuries of assumptions. Some will want to control that power. Others will want to destroy it before it upsets the status quo. And all of them will go through you to get to it." Elena's hand tightened protectively over her stomach. The small life growing there, barely the size of a plum according to Dr. Ashworth, suddenly felt infinitely precious and infinitely vulnerable. "I can't fight vampires," she said helplessly. "You won't have to. That's what I'm here for." Lucian moved to the window, gazing out at Camden's nighttime streets. "I have resources, Elena. Safe houses that exist outside normal reality. Doctors who can handle supernatural medicine. Allies who owe me favors. Let me use them to protect you." "In exchange for what?" He turned back to her, and his expression was open in a way she hadn't seen before. Vulnerable. "In exchange for the chance to be something more than a monster. To prove that 7 centuries of darkness hasn't completely destroyed whatever humanity I once had. That's all. Just a chance." Elena stared at him, mind racing. Every instinct screamed that trusting a vampire was insanity, that agreeing to this would trap her in a world she didn't understand, surrounded by dangers she couldn't fight. But the alternative was facing those dangers alone, hiding until something found her, pretending she could protect a supernatural child with nothing but willpower and ignorance. "If I agree," she said slowly, "there are conditions. Name them. I make all decisions about the pregnancy and the child. Not you, not your vampire council. Me." "Agreed. You don't feed on me. Ever." "Agreed. I have other sources. And you don't lie to me about what you are, about the dangers, about what this child might be. No protective deception. I want the truth, no matter how terrible." Lucian was silent for a moment, then nodded. "That's harder to promise. There are things you're better off not knowing, but yes, I'll be honest with you, even when you wish I hadn't been." Elena took a shaky breath. Then, "Okay, I'll accept your help. But this doesn't mean we're not." "I'm not asking for anything romantic," Lucian said quietly. "I'm asking to protect you and know my child. Whatever else happens, if anything, will be entirely your choice." It was more than she had expected, more respect than she had thought a vampire capable of offering. She nodded slowly. "Okay, so what happens now?" "Now we leave London. Tonight, before word spreads further and less friendly vampires decide to investigate." Lucian was already moving, his mind clearly shifting into strategy mode. "Pack only what you truly need. We'll be going to one of my estates, a property in Scotland that exists partially outside normal space-time. It's warded, protected, unknown to most vampires." "I have a job," Elena protested. "A life. I can't just disappear." "You can, and you must. I'll handle everything. Financial compensation for your employer, arrangements to make your absence seem ordinary. But staying here puts you at risk." His eyes met hers. "They're already looking, Elena. My informants tell me that certain vampires have started asking questions about you. We have hours at most before this flat becomes a target." Terror spiked through her. "Tonight? It's happening tonight. Tonight or never." He pulled out a phone, incongruous and modern in his ancient hands, and started typing rapidly. "I'm calling in resources. Guards. Transportation. Within an hour, we'll be gone." Elena looked around her tiny flat. The life she had built, the safety she had believed in, all of it suddenly revealed as fragile as tissue paper. She moved to her bedroom area, pulling a duffel bag from under bed and starting to pack with shaking hands. Clothes, books, the few photographs she owned, her laptop, everything that mattered to her, condensed into a single bag. Behind her, she could hear Lucien speaking in rapid, clipped tones to whoever he had called, arranging their escape with the efficiency of someone who had orchestrated coups and emergencies for centuries. And in her womb, barely developed but undeniably present, the impossible child continued to grow, unaware that its existence had just set forces in motion that would reshape the vampire world. Elena packed faster, her hand steadier now that decision had been made. Fear remained, but beneath it, something else was growing. Determination. She would survive this. She would protect this child. And somehow, impossibly, she would find a way to trust the ancient vampire who had just promised to keep them both alive. Even if it meant walking into darkness she couldn't imagine. Even if it meant becoming part of a war she didn't understand. Because the alternative, facing alone, was no longer an option. The car that arrived for them 40 minutes later was black, sleek, and utterly anonymous. The kind of vehicle that could disappear into London's night traffic without leaving a trace. 2 vampires emerged from it, both dressed in dark suits that screamed private security. They moved with predatory grace, scanning the street with eyes that caught every shadow, every movement. "This is Victor's doing," Lucien murmured as Elena descended the stairs with her duffel bag. Russian efficiency. Probably ex-military before they were turned. "They're here to protect us?" Elena asked nervously. Among other things. Lucien took her bag, his touch careful, almost respectful. "Ready?" No, she wasn't ready. But she nodded anyway. The drive through London was surreal. Elena watched the familiar streets blur past, Camden's chaos, then the elegant curves of Regent's Park, finally the wider expanses as they left the city center. The vampires in the front seat said nothing, their attention fixed entirely on potential threats. "Where exactly are we going?" Elena asked as London's lights faded behind them. "The Scottish Highlands, a place called Blood Moon Estate, though that's a translation. The original Gaelic is less theatrical." Lucien sat beside her in the back seat, close but not touching. It was built in the 14th century by vampire lords who wanted somewhere remote, somewhere the old powers still held sway. Old powers. Magic that predates Christianity. Celtic wards and rituals that create barriers between worlds. The estate exists partially in Twilight, not quite in normal reality, not quite in the supernatural realm. It makes it nearly impossible to find unless you know the exact paths. Elena absorbed this, adding it to the growing list of impossibilities she was being forced to accept. And it's safe? Nowhere is entirely safe, but it's as close as we'll get. The wards are ancient and strong. Only beings I've specifically keyed into them can enter. Anyone else who tries will find themselves hopelessly lost in forests that loop back on themselves. They drove through the night, stopping only once at a service station where Elena used the restroom, while Lucien's guards stood watch outside like stone sentinels. She caught her reflection in the fluorescent-lit mirror, pale, exhausted, eyes too wide. She looked like a woman teetering on the edge of collapse. But when she emerged, Lucien was waiting with a bottle of water and a sandwich from the shop. "You need to eat, for the child if not yourself." The small kindness broke something in her. She took the offering with trembling hands, suddenly perilously close to tears. They didn't speak much after that. Elena dozed fitfully against a window, her body demanding rest even as her mind raced with anxiety. Each time she startled awake, Lucien was there, unchanging, watching her with those ancient eyes that held more secrets than she could imagine. Dawn was approaching when they finally turned off the motorway onto progressively smaller roads. The landscape had transformed into wild Scottish highlands, rolling hills covered in heather, dark forests of pine, locks that reflected the pre-dawn gray like pools of mercury. "We're close," Lucien said softly. Elena sat up straighter, peering into the dimness. At first, she saw nothing but wilderness. Then, as they rounded a curve, the trees parted and she saw it. Blood Moon Estate rose in the landscape like something from a Gothic fever dream. It wasn't a single building, but a complex of structures, a central manor house built from dark stone, surrounded by smaller buildings that might have been guardhouses or guest quarters. A wall encircled the entire compound, ancient and imposing, covered in climbing vines that seemed to glow faintly in the pre-dawn light. But what struck Elena most was the atmosphere. The air around the estate shimmered like heat haze, though the morning was cold. Colors seemed richer, shadows deeper. It was as if reality had been edited here, made somehow more intense. The wards, Lucian explained, seeing her expression. They create distortions. You'll adjust to it. The car passed through massive iron gates that opened seemingly of their own accord. The moment they crossed the threshold, Elena felt it, a pressure change, like diving underwater or ascending in an airplane. Her ears popped. For a disorienting second, the world seemed to tilt. Then they were inside, and everything settled. The estate was larger than she had realized, sprawling across acres of carefully maintained grounds. Gardens that shouldn't have been blooming in October were full of roses and night-flowering jasmine. Fountains played despite the early hour, and everywhere, carved into stone and woven into iron, were symbols Elena didn't recognize. Protection sigils, probably, or warnings to those who would threaten this place. The car stopped before the main entrance. One of the vampire guards opened Elena's door with mechanical precision. "Welcome to Blood Moon Estate," Lucian said, offering his hand to help her out. "You're home, for as long as you need it." Elena stepped onto the gravel drive, bag clutched in one hand, and stared up at the manor house. Dawn was breaking properly now, touching the eastern sky with rose and gold. She expected Lucian to flinch, to retreat from the approaching sunlight. Instead, he simply smiled at her confusion. The wards extend to the sun. Within these grounds, daylight can't harm me. One of the estate's few advantages. A woman appeared at the entrance, elderly, with iron-gray hair and a face carved by decades of stern competence. She wore practical clothing and carried herself with the authority of someone who had run this household for a very long time. "Mrs. MacLeod," Lucian greeted her. "This is Elena Moreau. She'll be staying with us indefinitely." Mrs. MacLeod's sharp eyes assessed Elena in a single glance. "Pregnant?" "Yes." "How far along?" 12 weeks. The housekeeper nodded briskly. "We'll need proper nutrition then. None of this London processed rubbish. Good Scottish food, fresh eggs, real bread. Come along, girl. You look half dead on your feet." Elena found herself ushered inside before she could protest. The interior of Blood Moon Estate was warmer than she expected. Literally warm, with fires burning in massive hearths, and figuratively warm, with rich wood paneling and tapestries that depicted hunts and battles and strange celestial events. Mrs. MacLeod led her up a sweeping staircase to the second floor, down corridors lined with portraits of people long dead. "This will be your room. Private bathroom, good south-facing light. His lordship thought you'd want something cheerful." The bedroom was indeed cheerful, decorated in soft creams and golds, with a four-poster bed that looked impossibly comfortable and windows overlooking the estate's gardens. It was 10 times larger than her entire Camden flat. "There's a wardrobe stocked with clothing in various sizes," Mrs. MacLeod continued, "until we can arrange a proper fitting. Breakfast will be served in the morning room at 8. His lordship will meet you there to discuss arrangements." "Arrangements?" Elena echoed weakly. "Medical care, security protocols, that sort of thing. Now you should rest. You look absolutely wrecked, and that's not good for the baby." Mrs. MacLeod left as briskly as she had arrived, closing the door with a firm click. Elena stood alone in the beautiful room, bag still clutched in her hand, and tried to process everything that had happened in the past 6 hours. She had left her life, fled London with a vampire, come to a supernatural estate in Scotland where reality didn't quite work properly, all to protect a child who shouldn't exist. Elena set her bag down and moved to the window. The sun was fully up now, bathing the highlands in clear morning light. In the gardens below, she could see Lucian walking alone, his hands clasped behind his back, seemingly lost in thought. The sunlight that should have incinerated him merely illuminated him, making him look less like a monster and more like a man carrying an impossible burden. She watched him for a long moment. This ancient being who had turned her world upside down. This vampire king who had offered protection when he could have simply taken what he wanted. And she wondered, not for the first time, what exactly she had agreed to. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings began with breakfast in the sunlit morning room, where Mrs. McLeod served Scottish porridge and fresh eggs and bread that had somehow been baked before Elena woke. Lucian usually joined her, though he rarely ate. Vampires didn't need food, he explained, though they could consume it if they chose. Those breakfast conversations were strange and intimate in equal measure. They talked about small things, how Elena had slept, whether the room was comfortable, what books she might want from the extensive library. But beneath the mundane topics, deeper questions lingered unspoken. After breakfast, Dr. Nathaniel Cross would arrive. He was a vampire scientist in the council, younger looking than the others, appearing perhaps 30, with wire-rimmed glasses that seemed more affectation than necessity, and a clinical manner that somehow made his supernatural nature less threatening. "I'm here to monitor your health," he explained on the first day, setting up equipment in a room that had been converted into a makeshift medical suite. "The pregnancy is unprecedented. We need to ensure both you and the child remain stable." The examinations were thorough but respectful. Cross measured everything: her vitals, the child's development, her blood composition. He drew samples and ran tests with equipment that looked half scientific, half mystical. "The child is growing faster than a normal human fetus," he told her after the second week. "Not dramatically so, but measurably. It's as if the vampire genetics are accelerating development, while the human genetics keep it tethered to biological norms." "Is that dangerous?" Elena asked, anxiety spiking. "Unknown, but so far, everything appears healthy. The child has a heartbeat, proper cellular development, no obvious abnormalities." He looked at her over his glasses. "You're doing well, Ms. Moreau. Better than I expected, frankly." Afternoons, Elena explored the estate. The grounds were vast, full of hidden gardens and ancient trees and stone circles that hummed with barely perceptible energy. She found a library in the East Wing that rivaled major research institutions, filled with books in languages she didn't recognize alongside modern scientific texts. She spent hours there, reading everything she could find about vampire mythology, supernatural pregnancies, hybrid creatures. Most of it was myth or speculation, but occasionally she'd find something that resonated. Old legends about children born of mortal and immortal unions, prophecies about beings who could walk between worlds. Lucian often found her there in the late afternoons. He would settle into a chair near the fire, reading his own books or simply watching her with that intense, unreadable expression he wore so often. "What?" Elena asked one day, looking up from a text about Celtic folklore. "You're different here," he said quietly. "Less frightened, more yourself." "I'm still frightened," she admitted, "but I suppose I'm getting used to it. The fear, the impossibility, all of it. You're stronger than you think." "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding together." Lucian set aside his book. "Strength isn't the absence of fear. It's continuing despite it. You fled London, came here, trusted me enough to let me help. That's courage." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. In the soft afternoon light filtering through the library windows, he seemed less monstrous and more sad, ancient and weary and profoundly lonely despite his power. "Why did you turn?" she asked suddenly. "Into a vampire. I mean, was it choice or accident?" His expression closed slightly. "That's a long story. We have time." Lucian was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. It was 1347. The plague had just reached England. I was a physician in London, one of the few who stayed to treat the sick when everyone else fled. I thought I could help. I thought science and courage could defeat death. He laughed bitterly. I was arrogant and naive. The plague killed 9 people out of 10. My wife, my daughter, everyone I loved. And then I caught it myself. Elena's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected him to have been human once. To have had a family. To have suffered such loss. "I was dying," Lucian continued, staring into the fire. delirious with fever, covered in buboes, coughing blood. A vampire found me in the death house where they'd left me. She said I reminded her of someone she'd lost. She offered me a choice, die human or live forever as something else. And you chose to live. I chose not to die. There's a difference. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw centuries of regret. I've had 700 years to regret that choice, to wonder if death wouldn't have been kinder. But I was afraid, and that fear has cost me everything. Elena set down her book and moved to sit beside him. You saved people. You're helping me. That has to count for something. Does it? I've killed more people than I saved. Survived by consuming life. Built an empire on the backs of human suffering. But you don't have to keep being that person. People change. Even vampires, I think. Lucian looked at her with something like wonder. How can you be so forgiving? After everything you know about what I am. Because I'm carrying your child. And that means there's something in you capable of creating life, not just ending it. That has to mean something. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his predatory nature. You make me want to believe that, to hope that redemption is possible even for monsters. Then maybe it is, Elena whispered. The moment stretched between them, intimate and fragile. Then Lucian withdrew, standing abruptly. You should rest. Dr. Cross says you need more sleep. Elena watched him go, feeling the connection between them strengthening despite all the reasons it shouldn't. The third week at Blood Moon Estate brought visitors. Elena was in the garden, enjoying the unseasonably warm afternoon. When she heard voices from the front drive, she moved closer, staying partially hidden behind a hedge, and saw them, 3 vampires she didn't recognize, speaking with Lucian near the entrance. One was a woman of breathtaking beauty, with platinum hair and crimson clothing, Lady Seraphine. Elena remembered from Lucian's descriptions, the vampire who had questioned his motives at the council meeting. The other 2 were men, one massive and scarred, the other lean and intellectual-looking. Victor and Dr. Cross, though Cross she had met already. Cannot keep her isolated forever, Seraphine was saying, her voice carrying across the gardens. The other territories are asking questions, demanding proof. Empress Keiko herself sent an envoy wanting confirmation of the hybrid child existence. Tell her to be patient, Lucian replied coolly. Patience? The Eastern territories don't do patience, darling. They do threats and ultimatums. Seraphine's gaze drifted toward the gardens, and Elena had the uncomfortable sensation of being seen despite her hiding place. Is that her? The human carrying the miracle? Lucian's expression hardened. She's not a curiosity for you to examine. Of course not, but she is the political liability. A vulnerable human in possession of something every vampire power wants to control or destroy. Seraphine smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You should turn her. Make her one of us. It would solve so many problems. Elena felt ice slide down her spine. No, Lucian said flatly. That's not on the table. Why not? She'd be stronger, faster, capable of defending herself and the child. She'd live forever rather than dying in a handful of decades. Where's the downside? The downside is that she hasn't chosen it. And I won't force that curse on anyone, least of all her. How noble, Seraphine said mockingly. But nobility gets people killed, Lucian. You of all people should know that. Victor spoke up, his Russian accent thick. Seraphine has point. Even if delivery is shit, woman is weak. Baby is valuable. Recipe for disaster. The woman has a name, Elena said, stepping out from behind the hedge. Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. And she can speak for herself. All eyes turned to her. Seraphine's expression brightened with interest. Victor sized her up like a predator assessing prey. Dr. Cross merely looked clinical, as if he wanted to take more samples. Well, Seraphine purred. She has spine at least. Come here, dear. Let me look at you properly. Elena walked forward, acutely aware that she was surrounded by creatures who could kill her in seconds. But she lifted her chin and met Seraphine's cold gaze directly. The vampire circled her slowly, studying her with unnerving intensity. You're pretty enough, I suppose, though rather ordinary. What exactly did Lucian see in you? That's none of your business, Elena replied. Seraphine laughed, delighted. Oh, I like her. She's either very brave or very stupid. Possibly both. She stopped circling and looked directly at Elena's stomach. How far along are you now? 15 weeks. And the child? Healthy? As far as we can tell. Fascinating. Seraphine reached out, and before Elena could react, placed her hand on Elena's stomach. The touch was cold, making Elena flinch. I can sense it. The life force. It's stronger than a human child's. More complex. Lucian moved instantly, placing himself between Elena and Seraphine. That's enough. Protective, Seraphine observed, withdrawing her hand. How sweet. But protection won't be enough when the Eastern territories come calling. Lucian, Empress Keiko won't be content with diplomatic refusals forever. Then let her try something, Lucian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. This estate is warded against armies. She'd lose half her forces just trying to breach the perimeter. Unless someone lets them in, Seraphine suggested casually. Wards only work against enemies. What about allies who turn? The threat hung in the air like poison. Victor growled. Seraphine, you play a dangerous game. I'm simply pointing out reality. The child changes everything. Alliances that held for centuries are suddenly unstable. Promises made in good faith are being reconsidered. She looked at Elena with something like pity. You have no idea what you've stepped into, do you? The wars that will be fought over your child? The blood that will be spilled? Then maybe they shouldn't be, Elena said, her voice shaking but defiant. Maybe powerful beings should learn to leave vulnerable people alone instead of treating them like property. Seraphine's smile widened. Oh, I definitely like her. She's going to get herself killed, but I admire the spirit. Not while I'm alive, Lucian said quietly. How romantic. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Seraphine turned to leave, her crimson dress sweeping the ground. Give her my regards when the war comes, Lucian. And remember, I gave you fair warning. The vampires left as suddenly as they had arrived, vanishing into cars that sped down the drive and through the shimmering wards. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her knees felt weak. Lucian turned to her, his expression concerned. You shouldn't have come out. That was dangerous. She was talking about me like I wasn't even human, like I was just a thing to be bargained over. I couldn't just hide. Elena's voice broke. Is it true? Is there going to be a war? Lucian's silence was answer enough. Elena sank onto a nearby bench, hands pressed at her stomach. This child, our child, it's going to cause people to die, isn't it? No, Lucian said firmly, kneeling before her. This child is innocent. Whatever happens isn't its fault. It's the fault of vampires who can't see beyond power and politics. But it will happen anyway. Probably. Yes. Elena looked at him, this ancient vampire king who had promised to protect her. Can you win, if it comes to war? I don't know, he admitted, but I'll fight. With everything I have, I'll fight to keep you both safe. Why? The question burst out of her. Why do you care so much? You could walk away. Let someone else deal with this. Why are you risking everything? Lucian reached up hesitant and touched her face again. Because for the first time in 700 years, I've found something worth protecting. Something that makes existence feel less like a curse and more like possibility. I'm not walking away from that. Not ever. Elena covered his hand with hers, feeling the unnatural coldness of his skin. I'm scared. I know. So am I. They stayed like that as the sun lowered toward the horizon. Two beings from different worlds bound together by an impossible child and a growing connection neither fully understood. And in the shadows beyond the estate's wards, forces were already moving. Messengers carried news across continents. Alliances shifted. Plans were made and armies assembled. The war Seraphine had warned was coming. And when it arrived, nothing, not Blood Moon Estate's ancient wards, not Lucien's centuries' accumulated power, not Elena's desperate love for her unborn child, would be enough to stop it.